Welcome into Table Talk. I'm Brian Kell, and we have a special Table Talk for you today, as we'll be taking a look back to very close to 20 years ago when we're recording this, to September 11th, 2001. We're joined with a great guy, somebody I think very highly of. He's a former manager of the radio stations here in McMinnville. He's also a former pilot, and he is currently the director of 911 for Warren County. We bring into the virtual table for Table Talk, Mr. Chuck Haston. Chuck, thanks for coming on Table Talk, man.
Appreciate the kind words. I'm unworthy of that, but thank you for having me on. I'm glad to be here.
So before we start going back 20 years, let's talk about today and what's, I guess, getting closer and closer. Feels like maybe 20 years, and that's this pandemic that we found ourselves in over the past, I guess, close to a year and a half now. Talk about 911. I'm sure has seen all 911 areas, places in our footprint in the Ben Lomond territory have seen their challenges. But talk about what we can do as a community, what we need to understand that you all are going through from a pandemic standpoint and 911 and how those are coexisting.
Sure. Well, I'll start with internally, how we're, we absolutely positively have to be here for every 911 call. So the challenge for us is to keep ourselves healthy so we can help those who are having problems with it. That presents several challenges. One of the things that we did early on, this has been about a year ago, was that we moved to dispatch positions from the new part of our facility to the old part of the facility in a location where, say, those who've had an incidental brush with COVID and perhaps fear that they've been exposed, they can continue to work, continue to have income. They can continue to contribute in this location. So that's been a real plus. But it has impacted us internally, and we've had a few folks a couple who got pretty sick with it. So, we're just trying to keep ourselves separated, do smart things, wear masks, just common sense. As far as the impact on the 911 centers, well, here at least, is we've seen a pretty big uptick in the number of transports by our local EMS to facilities out of town. And when I say that specifically for COVID-related, COVID positive folks who are perhaps on a ventilator, pretty serious condition. And I looked the other day over the last month. I just ran a query of COVID positive, came back with about 43, 44 over the last month. And most of those are transports out of town. So that's kind of where we see it. And one other thing is, it was a bit startling to me, was the number of younger folks, talking about 30s, 40s, even 20s, who are ending up with COVID and in a pretty serious way. It can also happen if you're vaccinated. We've seen that too. So, hey, to me, I'm not on we don't lay hands on people at 911. I don't want to paint that picture, but we are involved on the front end of most of these events. And gosh, getting vaccinated and wearing a mask is the best advice someone in my position could give. All views aside, all perspectives aside, it would be to follow the advice of folks like Dr. William Schaffner, Vanderbilt University, These folks have been studying this all their lives. So that's kind of been our go-to here as far as practices and trying to stay healthy. And so our main goal is to be here no matter what.
I would dare say that, just as one final thing on this, that, and I know you do a great job of trying to remind folks in as many different ways as possible, and other 911 directors throughout our area do as well, know the difference in that 911 emergency call and a non-emergency, so that that line or those lines can be freed up for those most serious situations. And I would dare say, you'd say, please treat 911, those lines going there, with the respect and the that needs to be shown to those lines.
Right. 668-7000 is our non-emergency line. And if it's not something that's emergent or, life-threatening, that kind of thing, you're going to talk basically to the same people. The same folks answer those lines as do the 911 lines. But we do, as you say, try to keep those 911 lines free and available. So that helps us out.
Well, and I just now thought about this, Chuck. We're going from talking about 911 and you being the director of 911, and now traveling back 20 years to the date 9/11. That just now hit me as we're talking about this, and how ironic that is. I'm sure you're probably a little bit like me. Every time this subject comes back up, one of the first things that, at least me personally, I think of is the fact that me and you were kind of tied at the hip for a good portion of that day. But before we get into the reactions and all that, you were the manager of the radio stations in McMinnville before and after 9/11. And those stations, for those that don't know, WBMC at the time, I think it was Hot Country 104, Kiss 107, Star, one of those two, and then also WAKI.
Right.
The information station, I guess, out of those would be WBMC, a station that's dear to both of our hearts. But I guess it's important to talk about what radio was in 2001, and because it's a different animal today, and we didn't have social media. So let's talk about the importance that, first of all, information played when you're running radio stations in 2001.
Well, how many, you go back and look at how many sources that were available to folks. I mean, I can get more information in the palm of my hand, this phone I have, which confounds me occasionally, but there's more information available there than the combined resources of all the others. And so it was certainly different. And I always felt as station manager, I mean, there's a pretty high obligation there to make sure you're informing people correctly. Let's get it right, and let's get it out there. And so the immediacy factor was different. It's that, okay, where can you get it immediately? Back then, radio, television, and those kinds. And we did have internet, of course, but it wasn't something that you didn't necessarily carry the internet around in your palm of your hand. So it was different in that I felt like we were one of the sources of immediate local information, really, and it was you and I both, I think, agreed on that, vigorously agreed on it. And so now there's a lot competing for folks' attention. And with social media, we have communities within our county who have their own Facebook pages. Mm-hmm. So the way it's a more direct people to people kind of thing. So that's the big difference, it seems like to me.
And especially during a work day, you're looking at, really, in 2001, for the most part, finding out something during a work day, it's TV and it's also radio. And so right. When this is all taking place 20 years ago, almost to the day when we're doing this, there's really just a couple of different ways you can find out what's going on. So
that's right.
Why don't we go back to, I guess, just what are some of the biggest things of that, especially that early morning portion of the day, that come to mind when I say 9/11?
Well, it was a beautiful day. And you and I actually were in the same vehicle together,
Yep.
going to Cookeville for a meeting. You know, I'm going to say it was 8:30-ish around in that time. Just driving along. And if I'm not mistaken, you got a phone call on your
Me
cell
or you
phone.
one, yeah, me or you one did. And we'll mention
Somebody
who it
called.
was. It was, I think it was Lila. I think it was Lila Walker who called us.
Might have been. And that was the first indication something was up. That was, and I remember thinking at the time, I hadn't been out of aviation that long. And my first question was, okay, aircraft has hit one of the World Trade Center buildings. What's the weather up there? Because you know, not sure how many people realize this, but that was not an unprecedented event. And in 1945, a B-17 flew into the Empire State Building. You know, World War II, 4-engine bomber out flying just under the clouds. So it's all within the realm of possibility. But when the second one happened, I believe it all changed at that point. You know, we kind of knew that, okay, this is a terrorist event. What's the likelihood of that? So
Yeah, I think that you and I, like you said, first plane hits were en route. Second plane hits, I think somebody comes into our manager's meeting and says a second plane has now hit the World Trade, and immediately, I think it was Dave Thomas that was leading the meeting at the time.
Yeah.
Immediately, the meeting is ended. You and I think, start going to the vehicle and pass an area there at the Cookeville radio stations where they had some TVs on. And that was, I think, probably the first time that both you and I saw exactly what's going on with that.
Yeah, as a matter of fact, that was Austin Stennett came into that meeting,
right.
And he said, the Pentagon has been hit. Because I think by that time, we were all sitting around thinking, wow, do we really need to be here in this meeting? Let's get out of here. I didn't want to be there. We got work to do at home. And then, of course, the gears are all turning with everyone about, okay, is this how widespread? After the third one, we're under attack of some sort. Are there more? And I think that was the thinking with me on the way back. All right, how worried do I need to be about this here in McMinnville? Well, you know, you and I had a duty, and that was to get those radio stations. And for the first time, I think in ever that I recall, all 4 stations were broadcasting the same programming. And we were an ABC News affiliate at the time. And that went on for several days. And in fact, Brian, if you recall, WAKI stayed on it even longer.
Round the clock.
It was a pretty spooky time, I have to say. But you know, as someone who came out of aviation, of course, we all had more than a passing interest about these planes, but especially from the operational side and who was involved, who was flying it, what was the weather, how did this happen? There was a decision made early on, and I always heard it was the vice president who made the decision, but to ground every aircraft in the sky, land at the nearest airport, matter of national security. That decision, I believe, saved us. I believe, not big on conspiracy theories, but I do believe there were more bullseyes out there. And that decision to ground all those flights was a very important one, and I thought was the right call.
Chuck, because I've got some more questions on
Sure.
on the plane side of things, but just speak briefly as to your involvement with aviation, so that we can kind of put this in context, because the stations in McMinnville and Warren County, we're very lucky to have you there. I know that you spoke at a certain time, but tell the folks here that don't know your brushes with aviation over the years.
Sure, yeah. Well, I went to MTSU and I majored in aerospace, and worked with a company that did corporate, charter stuff for a while. Went to work for American Eagle, which was a feeder airline for American at the time. And from there, worked for several different companies. One was DHL, the freight company. I was on the 727 flying it there. And then I flew for another company that we did a lot of military charters. It was called Evergreen International. And I was co-pilot on 747 with them. And we did contract cargo mainly. I was what they call the freight dog. I flew passengers for a while, but the cargo flying was what I enjoyed. And so did that for about 13 years, total. And so that's kind of my brush with it.
So especially when you start hearing, knowing your experiences with large airplanes, when you start hearing the fact that it's these type of planes that have flown into a building, your mind is immediately just, I'm sure you heard a lot of folks say this, never could have imagined that being used as a weapon like that.
Yeah, I think I can only speak for me, but I get the feeling that we kind of suffered from a lack of imagination at times about what was possible. The Israelis never did. The Israelis, El Al, Israeli airline, they were on this much sooner than we were, the threat. In fact, they routinely had, I think here we would call it air marshal, but there was part of the military or part of the police organizations armed big time, assault rifle armed and on flights. They were used to getting picked on, and but they understood that much better than we did. If I may, I want to touch on something about the training in the airlines that folks might find interesting. Was at each airline that I worked for, there was training provided to you as an aircrew member about how do you handle situations, hijacking situations. But none of them the scenarios ever included that someone's going to, come in the cockpit, kill you, take over the aircraft. That was not top of mind thinking at the time. It was more about this thing they call the Stockholm syndrome, and about how people developing a relationship with the hijackers so that it was more psychological kind of thing. And of course, there are procedures that you do in the cockpit to get information out, and times when you broadcast it with code, that kind of thing. But never in the training that I had did it go to that extent. And quite frankly, some of the aircraft that I flew, the cockpit doors weren't much sturdier than the lavatory doors. Although they were locked, and the lead flight attendant carried a key to it, which was, I believe, the case on 9/11. That was how it worked still then. It wouldn't have been hard to get in there. Nowadays, those cockpit doors have been reinforced, and it's pretty hard to get in there. As far as arming air crew members, and we never much talked about that. That was, again, not top of mind thinking. That would have been more a little bit of fringe thinking at the time. But, we just kind of suffered a lack of imagination, maybe.
Speaking of imagination, something that I don't think could, well, I know you didn't because you told me, could have ever imagined is, I think when we were driving back from Cookville and trying to get back to the stations as quickly as possible in Warren County, McMinnville, it came over the airwaves, like you said, that the decision has been made to ground these planes. And I'll never forget, you hear that, and somebody like me, you go, okay, yeah, of course you're going to do that. And I'll never forget you turning to me and saying, did you just hear that? And I was like, well, yeah. And you go, this is unprecedented. Do you have any idea what this means? I'm like, well, of course I don't, because I didn't work in that industry. And I could just tell it all over your face. They're like, this is unprecedented, never happened. Nobody could have ever probably thought of this. Is the fact that every plane had to get down. We knew later on that obviously Air Force One was in the air, and probably some jets that had been scrambled probably all over the United States in some way, shape, or form. But to find places to put planes, I think you said that this is going to be unbelievable. Talk on that.
Yeah, of course, I believe there was information out there. I think the flight crews would have known, would have had some idea what was going on through their dispatch centers. So, for example, American Airlines dispatch centers in Dallas, Texas, and they can communicate with each airplane via coded messages on a computer screen called an ACAR system. That's old school now, but at the time, that's what they had. You can talk to them on the radio. But when that message came across all aircraft on this frequency due to national security, you need to land immediately at the closest suitable airport. That's places like Paducah, Kentucky, getting, MD-80s landing and parking, and Lexington and the Chattanooga. The airports we're not used to that kind of volume. And I can only imagine that, sitting in the cockpit, thinking, okay, well, looks like, where are we going to go? Which airport? Should we go on and fly into Nashville, or should we continue and turn around and go back? I just can't imagine what that was like. And how, as a flight crew member, I would have been pretty happy to be on the ground no matter where I was. So whoever made that decision, that was one of the most important decisions of the entire, post-attack period, was to do that. And it remained that way for days. And I remember going to my dad's house in Irving College, sitting on his porch. And he would sit out there at night and watch these planes go over, several. And to not see a single aircraft in the sky was eerie. It really was. I mean, to me, I was in that business. So, yeah, that was amazing.
We're talking with Chuck Haston, former manager of the radio stations in McMinnville, former pilot, as you just heard, and then also currently Warren County's 911 director. Chuck, you get back to the station. One of the things that I was most impressed with that was happening is that it was not treated as, this is something that's happening in DC, this is something that's happening there in New York. Is the treatment by local leaders to make sure that, from in this case, Warren County standpoint, McMinnville standpoint, that there's nothing large scale that's creeping into small towns in America. So I think I remember yourself being on the air. Also, I think Carol Hamblin was the county executive at the time, if I remember, for Warren County.
Right.
And I think maybe Royce Davenport as well may have been mayor. Maybe I'm getting that wrong. But the local leaders came to the radio station, and there was even a presence of, how can we make sure that nothing is going to go wrong in Warren County as well? Talk about that.
It was pretty scary time. It's a time you start thinking about your family and your children. My girls were pretty young, old enough to kind of know what was going on, young enough maybe not to calculate that this is not really a threat to me here in McMinnville, Tennessee. But still, that was frightening, especially for children, and I believe it was a school day. Mm-hmm. Schools closed early. I guess just
wait a second. Yeah, and it was Fair Week that was going on. We forgot about that. In Warren County, it was Fair Week. That's probably some of the first stuff we heard, was that we had a team of folks, Bobby Newby, Kelly Marlowe, that were at the fair, I think doing Senior Day that day.
Yeah, there was a lot. It was this time of the year in Warren County, but I do remember thinking that, and we all were. It wasn't just me. We were thinking, look, we need to get the information out there to folks. It's live right now, immediate, but also maybe to help reassure others that just finding out about this, because really, it did have that feeling of, we're at war, we're under attack. And as you recall, there was a fourth aircraft that the passengers gave their lives to stop that, and if I don't remember, I don't recall correctly, I believe it was a Washington target, maybe the White House or the Capitol. I'm not sure which. These flying bombs.
I guess, yeah.
Yeah. And, these were, what's coming next. That was kind of the feeling. But to reassure folks that, hey, look, we got an eye on things. Our local officials do. They're watching this. We don't really see a threat to us in any way right now. But, it's hard to, that was a feeling I figured was hard to, overcome for folks, because I was feeling it too,
I'm glad you said that. As far as family, that was probably one of the days that, while even though you're working at a radio station, it's like, I got to get home. You had young girls at the house. I had a young girl and a 1-year-old son, a little bit, and you're just, the thing is that you have this sense, like you said, of getting home. Home.
And then the question came up, in how many times do you let your children watch the collapse of that building and people dying live on TV? How many times are they going to play that? Oh, and I mean, they played it a lot. And, finally at home, my girl saw it, but playing it over and over, we just kind of had to turn the TV off. I understand why they did it, but that was something. How's this impacting the children? And they had to be terrified, And so having mom and daddy around, it was important. But everyone in the country was going through that same feeling at the same time. And
talking about from the kids' perspective, it's really weird because, like, a week before 9/11, the series finale of Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood goes off the air. I think I remember them bringing back Fred Rogers on PBS with like a special segment or something for kids. So you talk about really losing as a country a lot of innocence.
That's a great way of putting it. And our imagination was sparked, of course, after that. If this is possible, then and also, how do you calculate this? How do you process this? And then what do you tell your child about it? But as I say, that was going on in every household across the United States and maybe the world for that matter. But yeah, that visual, because interestingly, I don't think you and I, at least, saw anything until after, it was well into the event before I'm sitting there looking at the TV watching these buildings collapsed. And I never thought that could happen either. But looking back, well, you see why it happened. These aircraft doing 500 knots and carrying, 18,000 gallons of fuel. I mean, they were just flying bombs. So, but one thing that I did do afterward was listen to the air traffic control tapes that were made available. It was years afterward, but to listen to what they were going through, and as a controller, they're picking up on a problem pretty quick here. I don't want to jump around too much, but yeah, that was some day. It really was.
Something else that always comes to mind when I think of 9/11, it's not just the day, but also the days that followed. And I know that you, I can't remember how many days afterward it was, but you made a point. It was like, you know what? We need to get flags in people's hands. We need to find a way to get American flags and just keep them up here at the station. If somebody wants a flag, come by and pick it up, no charge. And that sticks in my brain too, because the amount of patriotism, love of country, wanting to feel like you're doing something because you feel kind of helpless. Talk about that mood that started sweeping through the area, obviously, that surrounds us, but just throughout the nation.
Yeah, the whole flag thing, that really came from the listeners. because people were calling. There was this incredible sense of, and maybe it's the same thing that you see, you know, when like in Waverly recently, you know, the first thing that goes up in front of a destroyed house is a flag. We're still here. You know, we're patriots, and we're still here. And that, I think that was the feeling across the country. And people would call the radio station, where can I get a flag? That's where that started. And it was over and over and over. And finally, I think what we just ended up doing was saying, hey, if you're a business, you have any, you know, let us know. And one of the ones who I remember sent a whole bunch up there was Nestor Stewart.
Go figure.
And that comes as no surprise, right?
No.
And so I think that's kind of how that happened. And then the Southern Standard, you know, they were printing flags in the paper, and everybody had a flag in their yard or in their window. And it seemed like for once, you know, we were all kind of on the same thinking that this was, you couldn't do much, but you could put a flag up, and that meant something. Still does. And that meant something. But there was and I believe I also read where in the major cities, the crime statistics for several days after that, there was like, you know, very few, if any, crimes. You know, it was just like everybody stopped. I can't quote statistics on that, and I don't know, but that's what I had always heard afterwards. So it was that sense of, we're at a standstill, we got to stick together, and this is awful, but we're going to get through this. And the flags, I think that's what sparked that, was people wanted to do something. They want to give blood. They want to go do something for a brother and sister somewhere else. What do you do? Well, you can't really do anything right now except show your patriotism. That's the best way you can do it. And that's where that came from. That was kind of a listener motivated thing. And we just kind of said, look, we'll keep them up here. If you want one, come get it. Yeah. And that was a real catharsis for people. I think it really was. Felt like you were doing something. Mm-hmm. So,
Chuck, as we kind of wrap this up, we've spent some time, you know, looking at that day 20 years ago. It's hard to imagine that 20 years has passed since.
It does not seem like 20 years. No, it doesn't.
No, but just what are your big takeaways from that day, looking back, and then, you know, as we move forward as a country as well, with new sets of problems, new sets of challenges. What do you take away from 9/11?
That's a great question. Number one is that sometimes you have to trust in your imagination a little bit, and things that, and to bring that a little bit more, you know, locally speaking. When we set things up at 9/1, our systems are built for this, they're built for that. When we look at our protocols for the types of calls, you know, we incorporated a set of guidelines if someone calls 911 from an aircraft flying over after that, because 911 centers were receiving calls from some of the passengers. And what do you do? So, you know, we instituted a procedure. If that ever happened, hey, here's your guidance on it and what to do. I mean, I wouldn't have thought of that until after, you know, the 9/11 thing. So I think number one, what my takeaway is that you gotta use your imagination a little bit. A lot is possible that you hadn't thought of yet, taking lessons from experiences of others. So number one, it's sometimes you have to trust your imagination. It's not fringe thinking, it's proactive thinking, right? That's number one. The second is that, I don't know, a lot has changed. A lot of things have been politicized that really don't need to be. hard to explain on some of it, but I do, looking back, that was a pretty patriotic time. It's just too bad it had to take that to bring that out. I still think that people are patriotic. I think we talk about a lot of things on the top end, but deep down, I still think that that's there. And sometimes it takes something tragic for that to come out, and that's life. But so I think, to me, the biggest takeaway is using that imagination and planning ahead. How do we prevent this in the future? Could that happen? We were a little naive, I think, a little innocent, and that went away after that.
Well, and some people may not know this, and we've just got a little bit of time here, Chuck, but that kind of preparation and that kind of planning for whether it, on your level or 911 directors levels all over our Ben Lomond Connect area, is to plan for some things that are not very fun to think about. And I know that you all and your facility, and I'm assuming other 911 directors and their facilities kind of find themselves the same thing. The planning for or non-traditional things that could happen in a community, you all play a big part in bringing people together, correct?
Well, we do on the front end. And again, we're the communications arm, so to speak, of emergency services. And there are many responders, law enforcement, EMS, fire. They're actually going out and laying hands on the problems. But for the first 5 minutes until someone gets on the scene, we have procedures that we follow as far as putting together responses for that. What type of information do these responders need? And certainly on medical issues, we have protocols that instructions that we give. But sometimes you talk with another 911 director, and you kind of get paid to think of the bad things. It seems like sometimes, but it's a good thing to be prepared, right? You have a better chance of a positive outcome if you do sometimes sit around and think about what could happen and use your imagination a little bit. And I know that our law enforcement and fire and EMS, they do that every day. And we're all it's kind of a best practices. You take note of what other people are doing. You discuss it. You may have to change procedure. There may be a call that teaches you a lesson, that maybe this procedure wasn't the best. So you amend it, you change it. But sometimes I think I get paid to try to come up with all the bad things that could happen. But thankfully they don't happen very often. Those really, really bad things.
Well, we want to salute not only you, but all of our 911 directors throughout our counties that we serve, the job that they and their teams do. Because it's like you said, you're preparing for some things that are rough, and always trying to look out ahead of those. I dare say, I think I've even heard you say it before, that your years at the radio station, whether it was severe thunderstorm warnings, watches, all that stuff, probably gave you a leg up as you moved into this position at 911 as far as the preparation side, because that was a big part of what you preached over at the radio stations.
Yeah. Well, thank you for that. I'm kind of a weather nerd, so it kind of fit with what I was doing.
Yeah.
And so yeah, that absolutely helped. That motivation to get the word out. And there are different ways of doing it these days. Mm-hmm. And we're in the process of installing some new systems here. First major installations we've had in about 15 years. So we're playing catch up in our technology, but we'll have some opportunities there to notify, which is a good thing. But I always say that my silent partner in 911 has always been Ben Lomond, and there's not a week goes by that I'm not emailing somebody or asking somebody a question, or so that works both ways. We do appreciate Ben Lomond here, absolutely. And Christmas Day, I'm gonna give you a quick plug.
Okay.
You didn't ask me to, but I'm gonna give you a quick plug.
Go for it.
Christmas Day, we had these massive 911 outages, if you recall, the bomb.
Nashville, yeah.
The reason that we were able to communicate in and out was because of our Ben Lomond lines. All our Ben Lomond lines, they're switched locally. They don't go through a facility someplace else. That saved us. It really did, and gave us options to continue operating. Whereas some other centers were relying on cell phones, even, for the public to call. So it was, that was an experience too. That's another show.
Yeah, that is true.
So
We'll have to get you back.
So thanks, past thanks to everyone at Ben Lomond, truly, for their help. It's kind of a partnership. I look at it that way. And there are a lot of questions that I can't always answer. So I have to have someone who knows. So I'm always bugging Ben Lomond about it.
No, it's not a bug. We're glad to help. And again, thanks to you and all the 911 directors throughout our area and what you all do and your teams. You've got a great team. We've got so many great team members throughout our whole area.
Sure. Yeah.
Chuck, thank you so much for spending time with us on Table Talk as we look back on 9/11 and then and hopefully look forward to times that we've learned some things and that we can put forward into maybe better times ahead and everything. But you're a brother,
Absolutely.
but you're my 9/11 brother too, because of that day. And so thank you so much for coming on.
It was my pleasure. Thanks for having me.